AP Macro. Lecture 3.6, Fiscal Policy and the Multiplier. Probably the most applicable one to the situation we're seeing right now because Congress is laying down some huge fiscal policy at the moment. All right, so to start us off, we're going to go through a little analogy, okay? So think of our economy kind of like a car. You can drive it at 120 miles per hour, but that's not sustainable, right? Eventually, you're going to crash and burn. So this would be like when we have really low unemployment, kind of like our economy was before the quarantine happened. You can also drive at 20 miles per hour, but that's pretty slow, okay? The car can easily go faster, right? So this is when we have a lot of unemployment, so our economy's dragging. Somewhere around 60, 70 miles per hour is sustainable. That's similar to full employment, right? Some cars have a capacity to drive faster than others. We're an industrialized nation. We have a higher capacity. Our economy can move faster than a third world country's economy can because we have better technology. If the engine, technology, or the gas mileage, productivity increases, then the car can drive at an even higher speed, right? So this would be like economic growth. It would shift our LRAS. So the government often speeds up or slows down our economy by using fiscal and monetary policy. We're going to focus on fiscal today, but basically their job is to push the gas pedal or push the brake and try and get our economy to sit right around that full employment point. So consumers, you guys, right? We buy things. You, me, your parents, your grandparents, anybody. We're consumers. Consumption is the most important part of the economy. It's what drives everything. Consumers will spend a certain amount no matter what, regardless of their income. So we call this autonomous consumption. So these are the things you're going to buy regardless of your incomes. They're the things you really need, right? That's your autonomous consumption. Think of them as the necessities, right? They're the things that you pay for that are necessary. Consumer spending is made up of autonomous spending and disposable income. So this is your income after taxes. So my mortgage and my car payment is autonomous consumption. I need that. Disposable income, if I go buy a new TV, right? That's where that would come from. So all consumer spending is made up of those two pieces. If incomes are less than autonomous spending, then there is dis-savings or negative savings. But what if incomes fall and people stop buying things? Who often steps in? So this is where the government moves in, right? People have been laid off. They've been laid off. They've been put on furlough, right? If a lot of jobs have shut down, families' incomes have dropped. You may know this firsthand. This is where the government steps in to try and increase people's spending to speed up our economy, right? They're going to push the gas pedal. So how does the government stabilize the economy? So this picture kind of lays it out. Think of that pipe here as the U.S. economy. Every once in a while it bursts. We move too fast or too slow. So we've got two toolboxes. We've got monetary policy. So this is the Federal Reserve, right? These are the guys I have posted on the wall in the classroom. We'll talk about them next unit. And then we have fiscal policy. This is Congress. So the government has two different toolboxes. Fiscal policy is Congress. On monetary policy, that's the Federal Reserve Bank, right? That's the stuff you need to know. Today we focus on fiscal policy. So for now, this is what we're going to focus on. Inside this toolbox, Congress has two tools. They can do things. They can either increase or decrease government spending, or they can increase or decrease taxes. There it is down here in the corner. If you go to the slides, there's a Clifford video. It's a pretty good one. I'm not going to show it on here, but if you want to watch it, it does explain it pretty well. Okay, so discretionary or non-discretionary fiscal policy. Okay, discretionary fiscal policy. Congress creates a new bill that's designed to change aggregate demand through government spending or taxation. Problem is there's a time lag because Congress is inefficient. It takes time for Congress to act, right? So if we're in a recession, Congress will increase spending, right? That's if they increase the amount of money the government's spending, you're going to have more money in your hands. Therefore, you can spend it and increase total spending. This is what Congress is doing right now, right? Our economy has slowed down substantially. They have announced they are very soon sending out stimulus checks, right? So they're literally mailing somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 to every adult in the country that qualifies, depending on their income. They're handing out money for free with the thought to increase spending, right? So if that check comes in the mail and it gets put in a savings account and doesn't get spent for 20 years, it has done nothing to help our economy, right? The goal of these stimulus checks is to be sent out and spent. You're supposed to go buy something with it, which seems ridiculous when you're out of a job, but that's how you speed the economy back up, right? So they're increasing spending, which is that's them pushing on the gas pedal. The other piece of this is not what we call non-discretionary fiscal policy. So these are automatic, they're built in. Discretionary, Congress has to do things. Non-discretionary, they've set them up in place. They're hands off, but they do increase spending or decrease spending and increase taxing and decrease taxing without actually having to pass bills, right? So this kind of circumnavigates the bureaucratic lag coming out of Congress. So permanent spending or tax laws enacted to work countercyclically to stabilize our economy. So think of this is welfare, unemployment, minimum wage, things like that, right? When there's high unemployment, more people file for unemployment benefits to create increased consumer spending, right? There is an unprecedented pull, people applying for unemployment right now to the point where the unemployment offices can't keep up, right? They're swamped with applications for unemployment because we have really high unemployment. Lots of people have been laid off, right? More people are applying. The more money that the unemployment program is handing out, the more money to spend in the economy. It's built in, it's set up, right? Same thing with like welfare. The more people who apply for welfare, the more money that gets out from the government. So it increases and decreases spending depending on how many applications get put in, right? So that's non-discretionary fiscal policy. Taxes also fit into this, right? Because we're on a tiered tax system. So if your income falls, you won't pay it to a certain point. You don't pay as high of a tax bracket, right? So that's also non-discretionary fiscal policy set up in there. So if we want to slow down our economy, so we're moving too fast and we need to slow down, contractionary fiscal policy is the government pressure on the brake, right? So these are laws that reduce inflation and they decrease GDP, right? So if you think to the ADAS graph, they're going to close an inflationary gap. So they're going to shift that curve back to the LRAS, right? So we decrease government spending in this case, right? We want to slow down the economy. We need less money in the economy, right? So we're literally pulling money out of the economy. So the government's not going to spend as much. We're also going to increase taxes, right? If we raise taxes for everyone has less disposable income, therefore there's less spending and it slows down the economy. Usually they use a combination of the two in order to do it, right? They don't put all their eggs in one basket, they spread it out between their two tools. Now, if we want to speed up the economy, we call this expansionary fiscal policy. This is the government pushing the gas pedal. These are laws that reduce unemployment and increase GDP, right? So this closes the recessionary gap, right? So again, this would shift the ADAS curve back to the LRAS if we're in a recessionary gap. So they're going to do the opposite here. Increase government spending or decrease taxes, right? More money into the economy, more money that gets spent, the faster the economy is going to move. So right now, we are practicing expansionary fiscal policy. We're trying to speed our economy up, right? We've dramatically increased spending and we haven't changed tax laws yet, but we might. Again, combination of the two is usually what we do. Okay, so graphically, what's this look like? So what type of gap and what type of policy is best? So right now we can see down here, we have 500 billion and our ADAS is at 400 billion. Our GDP is below the long run. Therefore, this is a recessionary gap. We need to get back to the long run line, right? So what should the government do? They need to increase the amount of money in the economy. So they're going to increase spending and decrease taxes. And it should shift our curve back to the LRAS, right? Now, it's a little more complicated than that. So the government should increase spending, which would increase aggregate demand here, right? We get that. But you can see here, we're $100 billion below our LRAS. We shouldn't just put $100 billion into the economy, right? They shouldn't say we're going to put $100 billion out there just to close the gap. Why is that? If they spend $100 billion, aggregate demand would move over here, right? It would shift way out there and we'd be at a giant inflationary gap. Why does this happen? The reason is what we call the multiplier effect. So a good example of this is the Super Bowl, right? Cities all around the country compete for who gets to host the Super Bowl every year, right? People want it. Why? Why would a city want to host the Super Bowl? Because when you host a Super Bowl, you get a huge influx of fans that come into your city, and those fans spend money, right? So the initial change in spending sets off a spending chain, and it gets magnified. So this is how it kind of works. Bobby spends $100 at Jason's product to buy Jason's products, okay? Now Jason has more income, so he buys $100 of Nancy's products. Nancy now has more income, so she buys $100 of Tiffany's products. The result is actually a $300 increase in consumer spending, right? Because money gets spent more than once. And we're going to talk into what happens when people save. That's the next piece we're going into. But money multiplies in the economy, right? That's the basic concept right now. So the multiplier effect shows how spending is magnified in the economy, right? One little drop spreads out, makes a whole bunch more. So that's why a city would compete for something like the Super Bowl, because they want more people there to add money into their economy, and then you get an even bigger effect off of it. So, effects of government spending. If the government spends $5 million, will aggregate demand increase by the same? No, it won't. Aggregate demand will increase even more because as spending becomes incomes for consumers. Consumers will take that money and spend it, thus increasing aggregate demand. That's the multiplier effect. So how much will AD actually increase off that $5 million increase in government spending? It depends on how much the new income consumers save. So if people are saving a lot of money, spending for aggregate demand will increase less, right? So if I put $100, if I spend $100 and whoever I spend it at saves $80 of it and spends $20 of it, that's only going to increase aggregate demand a little. If they save $20 and spend $80, then we see a bigger shift, right? So it all depends on how much someone saves off the money that gets spent. If they save a little, spending in AD will be increased a lot, right? So if they save a lot, small shifts in AD. If they save a little, big shifts in AD. So how do we calculate that out? We do this with what's called the marginal propensity to consume. So the marginal propensity to consume, we abbreviate it as the MPC, okay? How much people consume rather than save when there's a change in income, right? So this is how much money people are consuming. It's always expressed as a fraction or a decimal. And you would calculate it this way. The MPC equals the change in consumption divided by the change in income, right? So if you receive $100 and spent $50, what's your MPC, right? So you received $100, that's your change in income. You spent $50, so it'd be 50 divided by 100. So your MPC would be 0.5 or 1/2. If you received $100 and you spent $80, change in income is 100. Change in consumption is 80. So your 80 divided by 100 is 0.8. If you received $100 and spent $100, right? Change in income is 100. Oops, sorry. Change in spending is 100. So your MPC is 1. Kind of see how it works? The other side of this is what's called the marginal propensity to save, or the MPS. So this is how much people save rather than consume when there is a change in income. It is also always expressed as a fraction or a decimal. So to do this, MPS, it's the change in savings divided by the change in income. So let's work through this one. If you received $100 and you saved 50, okay, so that's your change in income is 100, change in savings is 50. So your MPS is 0.5. If you received $100 and your marginal propensity to consume is 0.7, what's your MPS? So you need to figure out what your MPS is. If your MPC is 0.7, that means you're consuming 70% of it and you're saving 30% of it. So your MPS is going to be 0.3. Can I see how it works? So this kind of clarifies that, right? Your marginal propensity to save is equal to 1 minus your MPC, right? If you know that MPS equals 1 minus the MPC, you can calculate these back and forth all day long. Why is this true? Because people only have two options, right? They can either save their money or they can spend their money, right? So they can either save or consume. So back to the multiplier. Assume that the MPC, your marginal propensity to consume, is 0.5 for everybody. Assume the Super Bowl comes to town and there's an increase of $100 at Ashley's restaurant, okay? Ashley now has $100 change in her income. Her MPC is 0.5, so she's going to save $50 and spend $50 at Carl's place, okay? Carl now has an income of $50, an increase in income of $50. So he saves $25 and spends $25 at Dan's fruit stand, right? Because he also has an MPC of 0.5. Dan now has $25 more income, right? This process continues until every penny is spent or saved. The multiplier is how many times money gets spent, right? So that's how you figure out the multiplier, right? So the total change in GDP is equal to the multiplier times the initial change in spending, right? So the initial change in spending in this case was 100, and you could go through and figure out what the multiplier is, and that's going to get your total change in GDP. So how do we actually calculate the spending multiplier in a more efficient way than kind of going through one by one like we did there? So your MPC is 0.5. How much is the multiplier? So here's your formula, right? This is what you use to get your spending multiplier. You can use either of these. You can use 1 over the MPS or 1 over 1 minus the MPC, right? So we know that our MPC is 0.5. So 1 minus 0.5 is 0.5. 1 divided by 0.5 is 2. So the spending multiplier in this case is 2. You can use either formula. I tend to almost always use this one just because for some reason it clicks better with me, but this helps. If whichever one works, you can use either. So if the multiplier is 4, how much will an initial increase of $5 in government spendings increase GDP, right? So we had, you go back to this formula, right? Multiplier times initial change in spending. So initial change in spending is $5. Your multiplier is 4, right? So 4 times 5 is 20. So we're going to see a $20 shift in our GDP, right? And that's going to show you how much aggregate demand will move, okay? Now, how much will a decrease of $3 in spending decrease GDP? If our multiplier is still 4, right? So 4 times, it's negative now, right? So you would go negative 3. That's going to be decrease it by $12, right? So use that formula, right? You can now use this to calculate the multiplier, and they'll give you the change in spending, and that's going to show you how much GDP moves and how much AD should shift, right? So you can represent that on the graph. So let's practice calculating this, the spending multiplier. There's your formula, right? I've got a bunch of different examples here. I'll buzz through a couple with them, right? So if your MPC is 0.9, what's the multiplier? Okay, we know the MPC, we plug that in there. 1 minus 0.9 is 0.1, right? 1 divided by 0.1 is 10, so the spending multiplier is 10. If your MPC is 0.8, what's the multiplier, right? So you're going to plug that in there again. So now 1 minus 0.8 is 0.2. 1 divided by 0.2 is 5. So your multiplier is 5. Your MPC is 0.5 and consumption increased 2 million. How much did GDP increase? Okay, so they give us the MPC. Now we got to calculate the spending multiplier. So we plug it in, 0.5, right? So 1 minus 0.5 is 0.5. 1 divided by 0.5 is 2. Okay, so there's our multiplier. Our change was 2 million. So 2 times 2 million, your GDP will increase by 4 million. Okay, kind of seeing how they're working out. I'll do this last one with you. If MPC is 0 and the investment increases 2 million, how much is GDP? So if your MPC is 0, that means people are saving all of the money, right? So you would go 1 minus 0, 0 divided by 1 divided by 0 is 0. 0 times 2 million is 0, so it's a $0 change in GDP because all of it gets saved. Kind of seeing how it works? So, our conclusion, as the marginal propensity to consume falls, the multiplier effect is less, right? Just depends on how much people are saving. And you can use the spending multiplier to figure all that out. Okay, so fiscal policy. Congress uses discretionary fiscal policy to manipulate the following economy. Okay, so we're in this case in a recessionary gap, right? You can see we're in a $500 billion recessionary gap here. We need to close this back. Okay, your MPC they're saying is 0.8. So what type of gap? This is recessionary. Should we use contractionary or expansionary policy? We need to speed up the economy. We need to expand it, so we use expansionary. What are the two options to fix it? To speed up our economy, we can either increase spending or decrease taxes. And then what is the least amount of initial government spending to close the gap? So now you can figure this out, right? So we know this. Let's figure out our spending multiplier. So we would go 1 over 1 minus the MPC. So 1 minus 0.8 is 0.2. 1 divided by 0.2 is 5. And now we need to close a $500 billion gap, right? So our spending multiplier is 5. So if we go 5 times 100 billion, that's going to close our gap and shift us back to the line, right? So that's how you'd figure that out. 100 billion there. That shifts you right back to full employment where you want to be. So all this stuff ties together, and that's how fiscal policy works. Okay, let's try another one. What type of gap? So this is now an inflationary gap because we're over here to the right of the long run. Should we use contractionary or expansionary policies? We need to slow down the economy, so we need to use contractionary. Okay, again, what are our two options? We can increase spending or we can decrease taxes. Sorry, I messed that up. We can decrease spending or increase taxes. And then how much? So let's do the math again. MPC is 5, so 1 minus 0.5 is 5. 1 divided by 0.5 is 2, so our spending multiplier is 2 here. And let's see. We are $20 billion too fast. So we need to slow down by 20 billion. So our spending multiplier is 2. If we take $10 billion out, that will move us back to where we want to be. Kind of seeing how it works. If this is confusing, down here, if you go to this slide in the slides, there's a Clifford video. Maybe he can explain it clearer than I can. Okay, what about taxes? The multiplier effect also applies when the government cuts or increases taxes. But changing taxes has less of an impact than government spending. Why? So if we cut taxes, we want expansionary policies. Assume the MPC is 0.75. So the multiplier, if we did the math, would be 4. If the government cuts taxes by 4 million, how much will consumer spending increase? It's not 16 million, right? It seems like it should be, but it's not. When they get the tax cut, consumers will save 1 million and spend 3 million. The 3 million is the amount magnified in the economy, right? Because they're saving 25% of it. 3 times 4 is 12 million increase in consumer spending. So taxes don't have quite as much effect as when we change spending. They do help, they are a tool, but spending's a little more powerful of a tool, I guess you'd say. So the tax multiplier is the next thing to talk about. So if the MPC is 0.75, how much is the tax multiplier? So this is how you simplify that down. Again, there's 2 options. You can use MPC times 1 over the MPS, or you can go MPC over MPS. I almost exclusively use this one because it's easier to remember and it's simpler. So if the spending multiplier is 4, then the tax multiplier is only 3. But remember that an increase in taxes decreases GDP, so the tax multiplier is negative. So change in total GDP, you would use this, right? So your tax multiplier times your initial change in taxes, right? So if we look over here, 0.75, that's your MPC, right? So 0.75 divided by 0.25 is 3, right? Kind of see how you would calculate that out. So Congress using discretionary fiscal policy to manipulate the following economy. So now we have an MPC of 0.5. What 2 options, sorry, wrong 2, does the government have? So we are here, we are in a recessionary gap, so they need to decrease taxes or increase spending. How much should they increase spending? We can use this same way we did before, right? So MPC over MPS is our tax multiplier. So that's going to be 0.5 over 0.5. So our multiplier is 1, right? So then we go over here, right? Tax multiplier times the initial change in taxes. So if they increase 10 billion, that's going to get us out over, right? How much should they execute? So, so to do spending, right? If we calculate the spending multiplier, then you would use 10 billion. If they want to do tax cuts, right? We just calculated that the tax multiplier is 1. So we have to do a total change of negative 20 billion to close this $20 billion gap, right? So that's just demonstrating that with the spending multiplier, it's a little more powerful than the tax multiplier. Non-discretionary fiscal policy, so these are the automatic stabilizers. Legislations that act countercyclically without actions from the policymakers. The automatic stabilizers. We have a progressive income tax system, right? It acts countercyclically to stabilize our economy. When GDP is down, right, the tax burden on consumers is lower. That promotes more spending, right? So if you lose an income in your household, you're going to have less money. If you fell low enough in income that you bump down a tax bracket, then you're going to get taxed less and you're going to have more money to spend. So when GDP is up, there's more tax burden on consumers, discouraging consumption, right? So you have to pay a higher tax bracket if you have more income, right? So if you're making a lot of money in your household, you may bump up a tax bracket. So the more progressive the tax system is, the greater effect it has on stabilizing the economy, right? If you just have small incremental changes, right, and you don't see a lot of different tiers to your tax brackets, then it doesn't have a ton of effect. But if you see a whole bunch of changes, right, you're going to have more automatic stabilizing built into it. All right, I know that was a long one, but that wraps up fiscal policy. The next one's the problems with fiscal policy, so we'll cover that one next. Thanks, guys.